Hi, I'm Greg Lambert with the Geek in Review, and I'm here with Nikki Shaver from Legal Technology Hub. And you're going to talk to us about transaction management. So tell me more.
Yes. I mean, some people might hear that and not think it's an exciting topic. To me, it is. This is actually one of the hot areas of legal technology at the moment. Transaction management platforms have been around for a while, but they're really gaining traction. And in fact, Legal Tech Hub has just added another premium category on our site for transaction management. So, what is transaction management, or what is the technology? These products are solutions that facilitate and streamline the processes involved in a corporate transaction, allowing them to run more efficiently and effectively. The platforms support complex deal work, but in fact, they can also templatize transactional matters, which means there are really great benefits as well for simpler deals, especially when they are run at high volume. Some of the processes that can be run in a transaction management platform include issues lists, conditions precedent checklists, warranty disclosure exercises, real estate diligence processes, and steps plans. The technology available often supports deals all the way from the opening of a matter through to closing and even post closing activities and obligations tracking. Some of the available solutions only address one aspect of a transaction, like closings, a real pain point, and others are end to end. And of those end to end, some platforms are modular, which allows firms to start small and grow into the platform. Perhaps most critically, many of these solutions are collaborative, which means that clients are able to communicate with their outside counsel through them and self serve information about where a deal is up to, their whip on a matter, and see clearly what the next deliverable is and who's responsible for it. If your firm or legal department is interested in streamlining deal practices, check out the premium category on Legal Tech Hub, which provides you with a full overview of the area, including deep dives on the providers, checklists that you can use to evaluate products, and a business case that will help you explain to leadership why this kind of investment is worthwhile. You can check it out on legaltechnologyhub.com.
Who knew there was so much involved in transactional management? So thanks for bringing awareness to that.
Thanks, Greg.
Welcome to the Geek in Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal industry. I'm Marlene Gebauer.
And I'm Greg Lambert. And this week we are diving into the rapidly evolving world of AI-powered legal research with Otto von Zastrow, founder and CEO at MidPage.AI.
Welcome, Otto.
Thanks for inviting me. Nice to be here.
So, MidPage is an AI native legal research platform that's making waves by aiming to provide litigators with tools to conduct better legal research faster. They've recently announced a significant $4 million seed funding round and launched an intriguing new feature called proposition search. So I guess we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. And just for a little background, Otto brings in quite a unique background to the legal tech space with experience in AI robotics and a master's thesis from ETH Zurich focusing on applied AI language models to legal documents. So, Otto, I think this will be interesting.
Yes,
Thank you.
definitely. And I'm going to continue that theme, Greg. So, Otto, your path to founding MidPage AI is quite interesting. You started a company called Navstack AI, developing AI-powered lawn robots. And then your academic work at ETH Zurich focused on using AI to help lawyers find relevant cases more efficiently. What was the spark or the key insight that led you to make that pivot from AI and robotics to tackling the complexities of legal research? That seems like a hard left turn
It doesn't
somewhere.
look like a straight path.
It always feels different on the inside, of course. I had a bunch of friends at law school or starting their first jobs, and so I was acutely aware of the things that they get confronted with every day. But when I was doing robotics before, I was really focusing on the deep learning part. At the time, we were using these low cost AI models to see the surrounding world. And so for our robots, it would be understanding where am I allowed to drive, is this a good surface to drive on? And the research side there was evolving extremely quickly. And at the time, I also noticed that not only is consumer robotics a very difficult field to bring to market, but also the language models were evolving at a much more rapid pace than the vision models. And so, and now much of the language model research has moved over to vision models as well. So it was really interesting for me to work on language because that was the more interesting architecture from a technical standpoint. But then it also sort of just made me try to find out which fields are going to be most impacted by language models being really good at reading and searching text. And because I already had lots of, contacts to law everywhere, I thought this would be, probably the best area to apply this to.
Yeah, we've had a few guests that talk about the language models affecting two markets specifically, and that's law and healthcare. Did you have any desire to go into the healthcare aspect of it, or?
I feel, I didn't myself, and I feel there are some others too. Obviously, as a programmer, that was actually the first contact point. So, around 2.5 years ago, every programmer suddenly got this, say, 20% boost in productivity because suddenly, from one day to the other, there was this tool called GitHub Copilot by Microsoft and OpenAI, where every programmer suddenly in their text editor had this really clever autocomplete. And that was actually something like what we started with too. So we've said we've got to transfer this amazing experience for programmers into what lawyers do because they come from a field where there's fewer technologists around, so somebody's got to give them the push.
Well, MidPage brand itself as providing everything you expect in a legal research platform, and more. So for listeners who might be new to MidPage, do you mind just kind of stepping back and giving us a big overview of the core functionalities and describe some things like the research agent or the citator?
Yeah, of course. So like with any legal research platform, we have all case law and we have statutes and regulations. And of course, every litigator, but also many other kinds of lawyers would use that as a daily driver to just do research and find precedents. And of course, as we all know, for most of the last 100 years, this has been exclusively Lexis and Westlaw. And there were a couple of reasons for that, mainly because those were the only ones that held the data. But now that it's possible to create data sets without being dependent on those two, and we're not the only example, but I think it's going to become much more accessible over the next couple of years. We might be sort of one of the furthest along for like fully utilizing this new data availability. And so we can actually have a really different search experience that allows you to do some searches in just a couple minutes that would have taken you maybe an hour before with the older methodology. And so right now we're being used by a couple hundred firms from small law to big law, but really sort of focusing on making it easy to use and accessible. And the users that use us today, some of them use it as a replacement, and others sort of just as a complement to the platforms they're familiar with. And when we say sort of everything and more, what this really means is, people have learned to use Lexis at law school, and then 30 years later, they're still using it, right? So there's a whole list of things that people are expecting and need from a research platform. So even if it's better at one thing, it doesn't mean that you can replace, your old ways of doing things until you have all those other items on the checklist too. And this would, for example, be a good citator, where you can see, was this case overruled? What are all the other opinions that cite this case? What did later courts say about this? And several things like that, right? What is the subsequent appellate case history? And all of those things are now part of the MidPage platform.
So one feature that caught our eye is the grid-based search, which, and we've seen some praise for this for its intuitive way of organizing and comparing case details. What was the thinking behind this design, and how does it help litigators, especially when they're juggling multiple cases or complex legal research issues?
Yeah, great question. So when you do a search today, you get this list of links, and then you have to take it from there as a human. Maybe you try a couple different searches, but really what you're doing is you're opening 100 different tabs just to start reading every single case that appears relevant. And what we do instead is basically take that as a starting point and allow you to really narrow down these potentially hundreds or thousands of search results into something that is much more transparent. So you can turn this whole classical search into a spreadsheet, and every column can be a question that you care about. So you have your classical search query, and then you just add all the things that you want to find, and then it will break down the results, like that. So maybe you can ask the outcome should be a certain type of motion that you want to be granted. You can ask something about the fact pattern. It should include, some clause or some type of car accident. And with all of this, you're taking your initial search and really narrowing it down, so that the AI shows you how does each of these results fall, with all of your questions. And that, I feel, is a way to give more control back to the lawyers without them having to, open up 100 tabs and read every case.
So it's interesting, like when you talked about the spreadsheet. So would you say this works in sort of a similar fashion to some of the tools that have been more in the transactional space, where it's like, okay, we're highlighting certain things and then we put it into a report that you can review more easily?
Absolutely. I think it's a common new UI pattern that is visible not only in transactional law, but also in fields that have nothing to do with law. It's like having a Google search, but instead of just this one-dimensional list, you now have like a multi-dimensional list. And it just happens to be a very useful way to display data and to let the users, refine it over time.
Well, we had a couple of guests on a couple of weeks ago from Definely that talked a lot about the user experience and the user interface, and I know that that's one of the things. Just the table example on results. So I'm curious to learn more about the philosophy that you worked with in creating the user interface and the development. So did you leverage attorneys to kind of help you design that? And then once you have it built, how do you get your feedback to make sure that what you're designing is actually accomplishing what you're hoping for?
Great question. Yeah. So one of the unexpected things was that we hired a lawyer that used to work in big law as a litigator, and he turned out to be our best product manager, because he was the target user. He was using Casetext and Lexis and Westlaw before, and he also had a computer science background, so he kind of came from both worlds, and so he had a really strong sense of what the ideal research experience should be like. And that was one part, so having him really guide the whole process. And the second part was we have this internal kangaroo court, which I think is a fun way to teach everyone how to do law. So in every engineer and every, regardless of what the employee does, once a month we give them a legal research task where they have to use either, classical tools or MidPage to do research like they were a litigator. And that really helps you see and understand all the little problems that litigators have, while reading cases. And I think there were several features that probably got a lot better just because the engineers building the features and to the designers and everything, they just knew what it meant to do research.
Yeah, that's an interesting
kangaroo court. I like
Yeah.
that.
It's an interesting concept because you're giving access to people to do legal research who maybe aren't as familiar with the just the law and sort of how that's structured and sort of what they should be looking for. And I could see where that would sort of highlight some things where it's like, oh, we could have a better user experience, that way, because you really don't know the level of understanding that you might be getting for a user. It could be somebody who's very new to it, someone who's not an attorney, but it could be someone who's very sophisticated. And I would imagine it's hard to satisfy that range of people.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm just wondering, do any of them sneak off to like the local law library and do their research, or do they do it all
And come
online?
back.
We certainly had the discussion internally whether people are allowed to use MidPage to answer the kangaroo court tasks, because it would have been so much easier. But then sometimes we force them to do it the old way so that they know, what are these features for. So yeah, that was quite funny.
So, Otto, I want to talk about the proposition search. You've mentioned that this was inspired by Casetext's parallel search, but it aims to pick up where parallel search left off by addressing some of its perceived shortcomings. So, what, in your opinion, are those shortcomings that proposition search allows litigators and researchers to do that they couldn't easily do before?
Yeah, great question. I would say there's probably three parts. One is that the technology got better. Now 3 years later, the AI that is powering the search engine under the hood is just a lot stronger than it used to be. We have a really strong engineering team, sort of an engineering first company in a way. So we're proud of sort of the search engine that is powering this, which just means the results are going to be, even better ranked. The second part is the interface, where I really like this spreadsheet approach, because now when you do a proposition search, you can, let's say you have that there's a certain argument that courts probably made many times over the years, and you want to find the strongest, I don't know, couple of citations that say exactly what you want them to say. And so that's when you use proposition search. And with our interface, you kind of get this very clean side-by-side view of here's exactly the phrase that the judge said or wrote. And next to it, you get this summary of the procedural history of the case. What is the case about? Roughly, how does it compare to your facts on your search? And this is just the most, condensed view that you could have to sift through these results. And that's just enabled by, taking this great search and moving it into our sort of spreadsheet-like view. And then the last part is, all the other features that we have on MidPage, they really allow you to filter down. So if you can now say, please only show me cases where, if this was a non-compete, maybe a certain condition about the non-compete should be true. Maybe it has to be something where the duration of the non-compete was over 5 years or something. You can now sort of take all the search results and just filter them down to only those that match your natural language filters. And this just gives you a level of control and precision that you didn't have before. So it's three things. It's a better search engine, it's a great interface, and it's sort of these powerful filtering options.
So I want to follow up on that. So, I'm a litigator, right? I'm not a tech person. It's like, and I want to understand how MidPage is going to help me better prepare my arguments, and prepare for cases. Sort of what do you envision is the difference between sort of what they're doing now and what MidPage can offer?
So I would say most of the time during research is really just spent being overwhelmed by this huge mass of information, and at the same time being really afraid of overlooking some very important precedent. And because we have a better search and a search that makes it really easy to boil the ocean and to know what did I see before, what is new, how does this compare to each other. It's just much easier to get a very, clear, organized view of all the relevant case law for your research questions. And once you have done a couple searches and you found all these good cases, we also help trying to sort of organize that by giving you some tools where you can chat with all the opinions that you've already found, because they're all part of your same notebook, your research repository. And that just gives you a good way to, after several days of research, your brain starts spinning because you've seen so many things. It helps you stay on top of everything and keep everything structured.
Now, speaking of the data set, you guys made a pretty strategic decision there at MidPage to building your own case law data set. And I know I saw somewhere where the ambition is to be the largest case law data set ever. So I was just curious on, you mentioned that this would help you stay more independent, and I'm assuming that that means against the two big vendors that we all know. But you also this week, you kind of backed that up with the $4 million seed round, which was led, and I think the official word by an unnamed legal publishing house. So, so Otto, without naming this publishing house, what kind of strategic importance do you have in having a legal publisher as one of the lead investors at this stage?
I mean, it's always great to um, work together with people who really understand the market you're in. We have VCs from previous rounds as well, and they've been really great at knowing how to hire great engineers and how to do marketing and so on. But I would say it's been such a fun experience to meet everybody in the legal tech industry, because many of the people have been around for 2-3 decades, and the same names start reappearing everywhere, and so it becomes much clearer to understand which strategy makes sense and which one doesn't make sense, and yeah, you should make sure to align yourselves with the right players so that they can help you grow. I can't say too much more.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big market, but it's kind of you run into the same people over and over again here.
So there's a lot of competition, in this space. So you have the big information providers are working in this space. You have smaller startups that are trying to crack the legal research solution. And then you have your buyers who are somewhat inundated by different solutions and generally have some of the larger resources, the larger tools. So, what are the key differentiators that you think make MidPage their offer is superior, compared to some of these other players and the seems like ever evolving group of AI tools?
Great question. So I would say, the competitors for us are Lexis, Westlaw, VLEX, and that's it. And there might be more in the future. There's definitely lots of big legal tech companies who've raised a lot of money, and they can always, companies always moving and evolving and expanding to different fields. Um, and at the same time, there's always this sort of consolidation where every couple of months or years, one company goes bankrupt and the other one merges. So and I think we're now in this consolidation phase where probably the number of players is going to get smaller, not larger. And legal research has been really difficult for startups to enter. That's why most of the new legal tech startups were actually in the transactional side or contracts, or they were helping with sometimes more specifically with dockets, but really legal research, because you need to have this huge legal data set that is very hard to build. And then you also have to compete with these very two established players like Lexis and Westlaw. It's just been such a hard thing to get into. But there have been some precedents. I think K6 is an example that is very top of mind for people, where they built an amazing product. They only had half of the essentials that people really needed for legal research, because they didn't have an army of 2,000 people that are marking cases as overruled or not, like what the older players have. They just couldn't afford that. But at the time, they also didn't have this really powerful AI that we have today, that can replace that same job. And so I would say 3 years ago, it would have been impossible to build a true legal research platform that can compete with anyone. But now it's doable. It's still a lot of work, but now you can create this data set and you can create all those things like the citator, the head notes, the case history, where you sort of see what was the procedural history of a case and so on. And now it's possible. So I feel that now this data will become way more abundant, and there'll be more players like us that build new interesting services on top of it.
Yeah, we've had this discussion before where there tends to be, well, and we'll back this up. A few years ago, I would say there tended to be a ceiling that a lot of startups would hit with data. That became a point where they built a great tool, but they didn't quite have the data there. And it was either spend $50 million to get the data or be acquired by someone who already has the data. Are you thinking those days are over, that the AI tools can help you with establishing the data sets that you need in order to continue to grow?
Yes, we think that over, and it's an interesting time to then enter the market because um, now it's no longer impossible, even though it's still a lot of hard work to create a data set. But also now the bar is rising, right? For example, Lexis and Westlaw, they have state trial courts, but they have never sort of fully gotten them to the same level. They don't have the same quality citator. They don't have full coverage in the state trial courts. And this is mainly because their mostly manual approach of doing things with this, huge, partly offshore human labor team, it just didn't scale to the 100 times larger volume of cases coming from the state trial courts. And also people, didn't find the state trial courts as important for research, and they have no presidential power and so on. But now that it's possible to do it, we're just going to raise the bar. We're going to add all those cases too, and then suddenly that is the new minimum. And when you add more and more things on top, it will actually start getting difficult again for new entrants. So this is probably a time where there's more shifts happening at once than there will be in a couple of years when it comes to the data landscape. But yeah, I feel like now there will still be only a few people that have all the data because there's so much work to maintain at a high level of quality. Obviously, most of the work goes into ensuring the quality, not the completeness, but ensuring that everything is structured cleanly. But I think it will no longer be just two players. And so as soon as there's competition, people will be forced to make this data available via APIs. And then suddenly there's just this whole range of new companies building, maybe side check tools or drafting tools that all rely on the same case of data that can be coming from us or some of the other new players.
Well, it's hard to talk about legal and AI and not bring up something that I have lawyers knocking on my door asking about, and that's when I use AI, how do I make sure that my research is correct? It's not making stuff up or hallucinating. So with MidPage, what are you doing to look at these issues where the AI is a great tool, but may also, since it's it's generating information, and within that generation, it may make stuff up. So, how are you leveraging things like your proprietary data set to play a role here?
So the easy answer is for every feature that we have an evaluation pipeline. So we have some handcrafted set of a couple hundred examples, and maybe have like around 10 different features that use AI. And for each of those, we use a slightly different model based on which performs best, based on our own benchmarks. And so whenever there's a new model that comes out that is very promising, maybe OpenAI released a new one, we can run our evaluation on that feature, on that model. And then we get a score. And that score includes things like hallucination. And so it's become very interesting to see how those, the numbers got better and better over time. Hallucination, it used to be something that can happen anywhere. It's now almost impossible to get a hallucination unless you're really encouraging the model to do so, or you have a just really weirdly designed system that is just asking the model things that it can't know. Then it will still try to make up something. But of course, since we're not just a chat, right? We have these very specific ways in which we use AI, and those are of course designed in mind with what AI can do. And so all of the features that we have, it always has some grounding, so it always bases it on the original opinion, and then it always quotes from that opinion and gives you a link so that you can open the opinion of that section. And so both you can verify, and also it's near to impossible to get our systems to hallucinate now, even if you try really hard on purpose.
You may have answered my question then. So, if you're saying that the hallucinations are pretty rare, that is good to know, because we continue to see in the news about people who are filing documents in court with, citations that are made up cases, and they're not sort of checking their work. So, how are you working to educate users on the responsible and effective use of MidPage, and what's the reception like been? How has that been so far?
Yeah. So on the drafting, on the hallucination side, if they happen now, then it's not really a totally made up wrong answer, but it's instead like a human that is kind of avoiding your question directly and not giving you, the best possible answer, but instead a bit, too much of a vague way out. And humans do this all the time when they're not quite sure. And it's not as helpful, but it's also not as wrong as having just a totally made up case. And that any legal tech product, if it still does that today, then they're clearly not doing something very wrong, because it's actually quite easy now to avoid this. This was more a thing from a year ago where the AI wasn't as good. Now, the problem is that every lawyer now, or almost every lawyer, has tried out ChatGPT once, and ChatGPT does not have access to a case law database. So then it tries to answer those things from memory, without having any place to check or to look it up. And then it can still have those errors. And I'm sure that ChatGPT is going to fix that soon. We actually even have a plugin where you can connect our database to ChatGPT, and then it has better access to all those cases. It's not quite as powerful of using our actual interface as well. But I think this issue is going to become fixed quite soon. And for now, I would just recommend everybody to only use ChatGPT for questions where all the material needed to answer those questions is uploaded directly in that chat.
You're talking about the human evading the answer to the question reminded me. I have a uncle who's a Pentecostal preacher, and he was laughing and said, when I get to a point where I'm not really quite sure of what I'm talking about, I just turn the volume up and I talk louder. And so it just makes me sound like I know what I'm doing. So it almost sounds like what both insecure humans and AI do at the same time. So, hey, Otto,
think about that.
Yeah. So, Otto, we're at a time for our crystal ball question. So, we're going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball and look out just a couple of years for us. And what do you see as the biggest change or advancement in how you think AI will impact the legal research area specifically, and perhaps even law more broadly, and where do you think MidPage's role is going to be in that?
Yeah. So I think one powerful mechanism is going to be that the same litigator will have more and more in-depth work product and output. I think everybody is going to get more powerful and more effective. These tools are like a multiplier on your existing talents, I would say. So if maybe in the past a litigator was able to, in a week, do maybe read and assess 100 cases, which would be a lot, in next year or the year after, you'll be able to process 1,000 cases or 10,000 cases with the same level of of depth, because the tools are just giving you many more pairs of eyes and helping you focus on the most important parts. And I think this is basically as if the guns on both sides are getting more powerful. So the other side has it too. And I think they'll continue to be sort of a similar amount of competition as before. I think small teams can handle maybe new types of cases that they wouldn't be able to handle before. But I think more importantly, when you have a big litigation in the future, we will just be really impressed by how they just turned every single stone on the world. They found every case that was ever just mentioning this concept, and they could do this much quicker than before. So I feel that's where we're headed, more depth, and then of course also maybe a slightly easier access. So for the small law firms where you really care about efficiency and the clients are pressing you to like, please don't even do any legal research, they're just asking you to give them the simplest possible answer. I feel that you will have clients that are trying to educate themselves. They will use ChatGPT like they're using it for their doctor as well, and they will come up with some wrong things that they think you ought to do as a lawyer. But it will certainly be the case that they have a way of understanding your work much better than before, and maybe that they can even solve some of the easier questions themselves, even though you as a lawyer might be afraid of letting them do that.
I want to go back just to one thing you said right at the beginning when we were talking about robotics. You had mentioned that you wanted to come into law because the advancements in the language models were pretty much more advanced than the vision models. But like you said, they're adding the vision models in. So I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the, I think, what are some of the multimodal aspects of bringing in vision, bringing in audio, things like that, maybe even sentiment analysis. Do you see that as something that you're going to see more and more of in the legal field?
Well, I would say, at least for legal research, being able to understand images is not going to have a huge effect. Of course, everything becomes easier when they can listen to the original deposition transcripts instead of having first a tool that translates the text and then the AI reads the text. I think, but instead of just focusing on the multimodality and adding images, I think they will be better at understanding the whole world and interacting with the whole world. So if there's maybe something just got filed to some governmental institutional platform, these models can now by themselves, do some Google searches, go out to the internet, they can click around a certain website, and they can retrieve maybe the regulations, or the updated guidebook or something, and they can compare that to the version that is in your research platform and, notice that it's maybe not quite up to date anymore. The models will also just take way longer sequences of actions in the real world on your behalf, whether you're doing research or something else. And so, yeah, at that point, it becomes really important to have them be multimodal. And that's happening already.
Well, Otto von Zastrow, founder and CEO of MidPage.AI, thank you so much for joining us today on the Geek in Review. This has been a really insightful conversation.
It has.
Thanks a lot.
So, Otto, we'll make sure that we'll put links on the show notes for listeners to find out more. But if they want to learn more about you or about MidPage, where's the best place for them to look?
Yeah, so we have a website. We upload lots of short videos about things you can do on our platform. Also, users always write us these messages, and we have this chatbot within our app or on our website where they can give us feedback or ask us questions, and we respond like within minutes. Or just message me on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you again, Otto, and thanks to all of you, our listeners, for taking the time to listen to the show. If you enjoy what you hear, please share it with a colleague. We'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or Blue Sky. And as always, the music you hear is from Jerry David Tasica. So thank you, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.